With the electricity price constantly increasing, the uncertainty of load shedding and power failures, and the likelihood of grid failure, having a solar installation for your home or business is as important and as valuable as ever. You might be considering getting a solar installation for your home or business. So in this video, I'm going to take you through the steps of choosing the right components to meet your needs. This will help you if you want to do the installation yourself and save on costs. But even if you intend to have an installer do this for you, it's at least beneficial to have an idea of what you need before you are presented with a quotation that includes items that you might not need. My name is Shanley, welcome to my channel. There are three main parts of a solar installation: the solar panels, the inverter, and the batteries. I'm going to start with the panels, then the inverter, and lastly I'll cover the batteries. Solar panels need to be sized according to the amount of energy that your building consumes. So although they are sold according to power output, what we are really interested in is how much energy they will provide to the building. Solar panels convert energy from the sun into electrical energy. The higher the capacity of the solar panels, the more electrical energy the panels will produce from the sun's energy. So the first step is to understand how much energy your building consumes. You can do this in a couple of ways. Firstly, you can look at your electricity bill to see how many units or kilowatt hours of electricity you've used over the course of a month, and then divide that by the number of days in the month. This will give you your average daily energy consumption. You can do this for a few months to get a more representative average. Another way you can check your energy consumption is by installing an energy meter. You can get hour by hour or even half hourly energy consumption information, depending on the meter you use. This will give you the most accurate information for daily energy consumption. You will also be able to see if there are days of the week when you are using more energy than other days. Once you have a daily energy figure, you can divide that number by 5 hours, and this will give you an estimated peak installation capacity. We divide by 5 hours because your solar PV system will not produce at peak capacity for the whole day. Production will ramp up in the morning, peak around midday, and then ramp down in the afternoon. Also, the peak capacity is determined under controlled test conditions. Your panels will likely never actually hit peak output. Typically, you can expect that the panels will produce around 20% of the electrical energy that they are capable of under test conditions. If you have a grid connection, you don't need to size the system for the full energy requirement. You can choose a system size that meets your budget. You will still save a significant amount on your electricity bill. After the savings have paid for the system, you can then invest in increasing your system size. Let's do an example. Suppose you look at your electricity bill and it says that you consumed 1000 kilowatt hours in June. We divide that number by 30, giving us 33 kilowatt hours per day. We then divide that by 5, which gives us 6.7 kilowatts. So in this case, you could go with a 7 kilowatt installation, or you could decide to start with a smaller installation, say 3.5 kilowatts, and then build it up later. If you have a grid connection, you're going to save on your electricity costs. If you want to go off-grid, you need to go for the full 7 kilowatts. You can shop around to find a good deal on panels. Say you find that 550 watt panels are well priced. You can get 12 or 13 of these to get to your required 7 kilowatt peak. Or you can get 6 or 7 to get to 3.5 kilowatt peak. For off-grid systems, solar installers might often recommend that you oversize the PV system to account for bad weather days. This can be a good thing, but you can also overdo it and end up spending too much money. Instead of getting a super oversized system, I recommend getting a generator. In most parts of the country, the number of bad weather days is relatively small. It's not worth it to oversize your system for just a few days of the year. Getting a generator is much cheaper, even with the cost of fuel, than an oversized PV installation. Also, it adds a bit of resilience to your system. If something goes wrong with your solar PV system, you have this additional backup element separate from your solar PV system. Solar panels will still produce electricity on bad weather days, just at a reduced rate. On bad weather days, you can run the generator for an hour or two to fill up your batteries or to support whatever daytime load the bad weather is preventing you from supporting. In areas of the country where there are a lot of bad weather days in a year, an oversized solar PV system might be more cost effective. but for most of the country, having a backup generator is the most cost effective. So now let's look at the inverter. Contrary to popular belief, the inverter does not need to have the same capacity as the solar panels. It just needs to be able to handle the peak output of the panels, but it doesn't need to have the same capacity. For example, your solar panels could have a peak output of 3 kilowatts and you could have a 5 kilowatt inverter. You don't need to have a 3 kilowatt inverter to match the panels. And if you choose a 5 kilowatt inverter, you don't need to install 5 kilowatts of solar panels. The inverter should be sized according to your building's peak power consumption, or peak load. We've already taken care of the energy requirement with the panels. Now we need to look at the maximum power your building will require at any given moment. There are a couple of ways to determine your peak load. The first is with an energy meter. Your energy meter will show you the peaks in your building's load, and you can size the inverter accordingly. One thing to keep in mind though, if your energy meter takes readings once every hour or once every 30 minutes, you might miss some peaks in between. A kettle, for example, takes a few minutes to boil, but has a high power requirement. Your energy meter will most likely miss this load unless it takes readings every minute. This is an example of a load profile from an energy meter. For this building, the peak load is around 1.3 kilowatts. The second way to determine your peak load, which deals with this issue of missed peaks, is to look at the high power appliances in your home and to determine how many of them you are likely to use at the same time. These are generally appliances with a heating element: kettles, geysers, dishwashers, washing machines, toasters, irons, and so on. Make a list of these items along with their power requirement, which you can get on the nameplate. Next, group the appliances together that you are likely to use at the same time. Summing their power requirements will give you your peak load. This is an example of a nameplate on the underside of a kettle. This kettle has a maximum power requirement of 1200 watts or 1.2 kilowatts. To save on your inverter cost, you could also use this exercise to decide which appliances you will never use at the same time. For example, if your geezer's load is 3 kilowatts, your iron 2 kilowatts, and your dishwasher 2.5 kilowatts, you could have a rule in your building never to use all three of these appliances at the same time. Then your peak output will never be more than 5.5 kilowatts as opposed to a peak output of 7.5 kilowatts when all the appliances are in use. This will reduce your inverter size requirement and thus the cost of your system. Once you have your peak load, you are ready to choose your inverter. We never want the inverter to be operating at full capacity. Operating at full capacity strains the inverter and reduces its life. So add around 10 to 15% to the peak load to get the inverter size you need. For example, say your peak load is 7.5 kilowatts. Adding 10 to 15% to this gives around 8.5 kilowatts. Any inverter with this capacity or higher will be suitable. Also, check that the inverter you choose is able to handle the peak output of your solar panels. It might also be a good idea to get 2 small inverters as opposed to one big one. This will add resilience to your system. If one inverter has a fault and needs a repair, the second one can carry at least some of your load during the repair. But keep in mind that you still need to be able to support your load. If you have one appliance that requires 5 kilowatts, it will not make any sense to get 2 4 kilowatt inverters. There are 3 types of inverters: off-grid inverters, grid-tied inverters, and hybrid inverters. Hybrid inverters are the preferred type because they allow you to use a range of power supplies, including the grid, your battery bank, as well as a generator. Even if you are going completely off-grid, a hybrid inverter is still recommended because of the way it manages power usage and integration with a standby generator. So we've looked at the panels, we've looked at the inverter, and now we look at the battery. There are a few reasons you may want to include a battery in your installation. 1. You might want to have backup power during load shedding or a power outage. 2. You're going off-grid, so the battery is an indispensable component. 3. You want to store some of the excess solar power generated during the day for use overnight to maximize your savings. For now, I'm only going to look at the first and second reasons. The third reason is a value engineering exercise. You will need to weigh the cost of the battery against the savings on your electricity bill to determine the optimal size for a decent payback period. Battery sizing is based on an energy value. You need to know how much energy you need to store in the battery for use during a power outage or for overnight use in the case of an off-grid setup. To determine how much energy you need the battery to store, start by deciding what devices you would like to power when there is a power outage. In the case of an off-grid setup, list the devices you will need to power once the sun has gone down. These devices could include lights, Wi-Fi, television, fridges, and so on. Again, there are two ways of determining the energy requirements of these devices. One way is to link an energy meter to the devices you want to support. Another way is by listing the power requirements of each of the devices found on the nameplate and then multiplying the power requirement by the number of hours you expect to be using the device during the outage or overnight. As an example, let's look at a fridge. A fridge might have a power requirement of 60 watts. Let's say you need to run it for 14 hours. That's 5 p.m. in the afternoon until 7 a.m. the next day. The energy you need to store in the battery to support the fridge is 60 times 14, which is 840 watt hours. Fridges don't constantly run at full power, so this is an overestimation, but it demonstrates the principle. You can adjust the figure accordingly. For another example, let's say you need to use a hairdryer for 15 minutes. The hairdryer might have a power requirement of 2 kilowatts or 2000 watts. 15 minutes is a quarter of an hour or 0.25 hours. So the energy you need to store to be able to use the hairdryer is 2000 times 0.25, which is 500 watt hours. So for a fridge and a hairdryer, you will need to store 840 plus 500, which is 1340 watt hours or 1.34 kilowatt hours. Do this for all the devices that you need to support with the battery, adding them all together to give you your energy storage requirement. Batteries have a maximum recommended depth of discharge. This is the maximum battery capacity you can safely use without damaging the battery or reducing its lifespan. For lithium-ion batteries, the recommended depth of discharge is typically 80%, meaning that you can use 80% of the battery's capacity safely. For lead-acid batteries, the depth of discharge is typically 50%. To determine the battery capacity you need, divide your energy storage requirement by the battery's depth of discharge. Suppose your energy requirement is 3000 watt hours or 3 kilowatt hours, and you intend to go with lithium-ion batteries. The battery capacity you need is 3 divided by 0.8, which is 3.75 kilowatt hours. Suppose you want to use lead-acid batteries. The battery capacity you need is 3 divided by 0.5, which is 6 kilowatt hours. Now you can shop around and find a battery that meets this capacity requirement. Battery capacities are given in amp hours. The battery will also have an operating voltage. By multiplying these numbers together, you will get the storage capacity as an energy value in watt hours. Suppose it's a 100 amp hour battery with an operating voltage of 50 volts. This means it has a storage capacity of 5000 watt hours or 5 kilowatt hours. Select a battery that meets or exceeds the requirement you've calculated. You can also add a few batteries together to meet your storage requirement. Lastly, batteries also have a recommended and maximum discharge rate. It's important to ensure that the discharge rate of the battery corresponds to your needs. If a battery has a maximum discharge rate of 100 amps and operates at 50 volts, then the maximum power it can deliver is 100 times 50, which is 5000 watts or 5 kilowatts. If you anticipate a load at or above 5 kilowatts, this battery will not be suitable. You either need to get a different battery or you need to add another battery in parallel. I hope this has been helpful. I'd love to hear your feedback, and it would be great to know if you've successfully implemented the concepts that I've shared. Let me know in the comments below. Until next time.